Hello, my name is Dr. Joyce Van Donkersgoed. We will be discussing tag or mud on the hide of cattle and what impacts this has on production and processing. Tag is a term used by both processors and feedlot personnel to refer to the mud, soil, and manure on the hide of cattle. The amount of tag on the hides of cattle reflects weather conditions such as moisture and temperature that increase or decrease the amount of tag on the hide of cattle. When pen conditions are muddy, it can be difficult for cattle to get to the feed bunk and water trough. Studies have shown that the performance of the cattle, such as their weight gain and various carcass traits such as dressing percent of the cattle, may be reduced and the cost of gain increased as the amount of tag on the hide of these cattle increases. During transport, dirty livestock trucks may increase the risk of dirty hides on cattle. However, research has not found any association between the cleanliness of trucks and bacterial contamination of hides or carcasses. There are various scoring systems that can be used to assess the amount of tag on cattle. Here in this slide is a picture of a mud scoring system developed by Dr. Temple Grannon from the Colorado State University. This is a scoring system that feedlot producers can use to assess the amount of tag both in their pens and on the cattle. Tag can be considered an animal welfare issue when the tag becomes significant on the cattle because, again, it impacts their ability to get to the food and water. Taggy cattle are of concern to packers because it is harder to remove the hide of these cattle and keep the carcass clean underneath. There is an association between the amount of tag on cattle and visual contamination or mud on the carcass. In other words, the more mud on the hide, the greater potential to get more mud on the carcass after skinning. However, various research has been conducted both here in Canada and elsewhere, and based on packer experience, there has been found no clear association between the amount of mud or tag on the hide of cattle and bacterial contamination of the carcass after skinning. In other words, dirty hides don't necessarily result in more bacteria on the carcass after skinning. And research that has been conducted here in Canada has found actually sometimes dry, dusty hides that don't look that dirty actually result in more bacterial contamination because there is aerosolization of the bacteria and dust onto the carcass as the hide is pulled off the carcass with automatic hide pullers. Processors do adjust to try to reduce the amount of potential contamination from dirty hides by slowing their line speed down and adding more trimmers when cattle hides are dirty. Some of our larger processors also have hide washes to clean the hide before they actually skin the carcass. The picture here in this attachment shows you one of those automatic hide washers that some large processors have in place. Processors, because they have to make adjustments to try to keep the carcass clean because of dirty cattle, will discount feedlot producers for taggy cattle because it costs them more money to process these cattle. The occurrence of tag, or the amount of tag on cattle, is routinely assessed at our processors. They record these mud scores as cattle come into the holding pens, into the processing yard, and based on those mud scores, they may make adjustments in their processing line. The Canadian cattle industry assessed the amount of tag on cattle during our beef quality audits that we conducted. In the 1995 audit that I conducted for the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, we found that 37% of fed cattle, which are our feedlot steers and heifers, had some amount of tag on their hide at slaughter. In our non-fed cattle, which is our cull cows and bulls, only 2.5% of them had some mud on their hides at slaughter. In the second audit that I conducted in 1999, we found tag on 45% of the fed cattle, but an increase in the non-fed cattle up to 41%, most likely reflecting weather conditions. In 2011, the most recent beef quality audit we did, 85% of the fed cattle had some amount of tag on them and 21% of the non-fed cattle. During this year, we actually had extremely wet winter conditions, and pen conditions explain the increased tag on the cattle. When we did the beef quality audits, we tried to calculate economic losses from tag. At the processing level, if we look at tag that can damage the hide value, trim losses, and increased labor costs in the processing plant, In the 1995 audit, we calculated $1.21 head loss. In the 1999 audit, a $9.25 per head loss from tag, and in the most recent audit, $8.17 head loss because of tag on the hide of these cattle. These economic losses do not include production losses that the feedlot producer would lose because of reduced performance because of muddy pens. How do we prevent tag in cattle? It all starts with good pen design. We design our feedlot pens well so they have a good slope and the water drains off into our catch basins and the pens can dry quickly. That makes a big difference on how muddy the pens get during bad weather. The other thing is to have sufficient pen size for the number of cattle that we put in these pens. Once we have these pens developed, we need to maintain them. Things like filling in low-lying spots where cattle dig out mud and water can pond. We need to fill those in with dirt. And then regular cleaning of our feedlot pens, such as scraping and removal of the manure as required. This, however, comes at a significant cost to feedlot producers, anywhere from $3,000 to $4,000 per pen of cattle of 225 head. The other thing we can do to keep pens dry is repair leaky water bowls. Some people discuss adjusting stocking density to reduce the amount of tag on cattle. This can be done only when we have sufficient pen space available to do this, and it may have some impact on tag on hide. Probably more commonly done is to add bedding into the pens of the cattle and create bedding mounds where the cattle can lay on this dry bedding, and that helps keep their hides clean. This again also comes at a cost to the producer. 4 large bales of straw plus labor to bed just one pen costs at least $150 per pen. Producers do believe in reducing tag because tag impacts performance losses on cattle, and it also is a cost to the producer or to the processor since he has to make adjustments for the mud on the hide. So the industry, both the producer and the processor, are working together to try to reduce the impacts of tag.